a physical thing by definition, and so I picture me sitting in the car and trying to drive a stick shift, with no feet for the pedals and no hands for the steering wheel and the stick. How can you drive without somehow physically interacting with the mechanism? But the soul, by definition, doesn't have any physical parts, and so this becomes Descartes' error. Right. It's a book by. It's not just the book, but the idea that Descartes has made a mistake. This is clearly not something that's possible. By the way, not everyone agrees. I think right at the beginning of the course I pointed out my favorite theory is the orchestrated objective reduction theory, which suggests that at least somehow we have quantum computers functioning somehow in our brain that interact with the physical body. The answer to that, though, is in a sense it's expanding what we mean by physical to include quantum particles. And so it's almost like, well, they don't know what they're talking about because, well, it doesn't make sense in their language. But in our language, we've now got a key that enables us to connect how we can feel somehow spiritual and outside of this particular time and space. How do we interact with the past and the future? Neat videos talking about how we can actually influence the past from now. There's ways of doing it. It can actually do experiments where you can see that the past is influenced by the future, etc. So if you think of our soul as all time and space, it's you from, maybe birth all the way to death, and it's not like your body is the end of that because all of time and space exists at once. So in this sense, you are infinite and immortal in that sense. Not immortal in the sense that the body will live forever, but that throughout all time and space, that niche that is you is always there as part of this eternal time and space. But still, Descartes' error, for those who are physicalists or believe that the body is this physical thing, and we might refer to the brain as our wetware, instead of our hardware, because we're not computers with hardware, we're people with wetware, because our brains are soggy, wet things, right? And we have uploading information, right? So we get software on our wetware, right? But even if you think that that's all that we are, they're critical of Descartes for thinking that there's something else outside of that, and that's his error. On the other hand, I would argue, but don't answer a question on a graduate record exam this way, that actually he was just saying that the soul existed or the mind existed separate from the body to keep from getting burned at the stake. That's my answer. And how does that work? Well, literally, for Descartes, the homunculus in the body has no use whatsoever. He describes that it's there, and that's where the soul interacts with the body. But just like Thomas Hobbes, the body is completely mechanical and reacting to everything seemingly on its own, so that the mind doesn't really have anything to do. So it's almost like an extra thing that he threw in there in order to just keep himself out of trouble. And even so, Descartes spent his last years before, of course, he went to Sweden to die. Thank you, Queen Christina. But he did live in the Netherlands. And why in the Netherlands? The Netherlands was in between Catholic France and Protestant Lutheran Germany. And so the Dutch were very open-minded, and actually they're famously still very liberal in many ways. So much so that the next philosopher we'll be talking about, who is Spinoza, his family moved there from Spain when El Cid pushed the Moors out of Spain, and so the Jewish families had to leave. And so the Jewish families, a lot of them moved to the Netherlands, where they found it was safe, not because the Jewish religion was respected, but because they weren't persecuted. So they didn't have a lot of the rights that the various types of Christians had, but because they were liberal enough that they allowed different types of Christians, they were able to live there, and so on. I still got in trouble, etc. But so, did he actually believe that there was a soul or a spirit there, or was he thinking that the body was completely mechanical? And so when I think about the question, how did Galileo influence them, who was more influenced, I think Hobbes more clearly seems influenced by Galileo, because he doesn't hide an idea that, maybe there's a soul. He instead just completely interprets the body as a mechanical thing, very much like people like Steven Pinker and other, contemporaries. Daniel Dennett, we had lots of folks in our academic communities that believe that the body is just totally the physical being. And yes, once it dies, that's the end of it, etc. Aquinas, by the way, and Orthodox Christianity, Roman Catholic Christianity, at the point where they accepted Aristotle's philosophy, they changed the point of view about the resurrection and argued that the resurrection had to be a physical body's resurrection, right? So that on the last day, when Jesus comes, the second coming, the dead will rise up and you'll have your body again, and that's when your soul is, once again there, right? Because the body once again is moving, and that's when it has its soul again. Prior to that, and especially the Protestants, didn't like that idea, and instead kept to the idea that there was an afterlife immediately after death, that the soul went somewhere immediately. Very Greek idea. And actually the church obviously still capitalized on that by selling indulgences to people to convince them to give the church money to make sure that their parents got out of jail. Purgatory, whatever. If they went to hell, they couldn't help them then. It's too late. But by the way, the image we have of hell and purgatory mostly comes from Dante, right? The Italian poems, where he was basically inventing things. He was in a vacuum at the time, so none of the church had authority to condemn that inventiveness that he had. And by the time they did, it was too late, and everybody loved the poems and started believing in all the various levels of hell, and the devil was actually in frozen ice upside down instead of in a hot place, etc. But so enough at the moment for Descartes. Let's go back to Hobbes and social contract. So I mentioned that the presbyters kind of invented the modern world, at least according to the one author, because they became democrats, in a sense, a democracy in the church, then the community, then the state. And how did that function? Well, it was because now individuals in the community have rights, while prior to this, the belief was in an authoritarian top-down government where the king literally had all the power, although he got it primarily from the Pope. So, remember, Napoleon was kind of an outlier in this, because when the Pope came up to crown him emperor, Napoleon took the crown from the Pope and put it on his own head to indicate that he wasn't emperor because the Pope had made him so. He was emperor because he had made himself the emperor. But in any case, thanks to the Calvinists who were Presbyterians, who then emphasized bottom-up power, right? We the people, basically. And by the way, this is also the origin of the Whig philosophy. And the Whigs actually had a revolution against the monarchs, but lost, and they mostly fled to the American colonies and started teaching at places like William and Mary, where Thomas Jefferson and George Washington went to college. And so they end up growing up with a Whig philosophy that is, we the people. That's where the social contract gets its beginning, that we have rights as members of this community, and we form a contract with one another in order to establish how the community should behave, to protect ourselves, right? And with Hobbes, basically he argues that nature is a state of war of each against each. One of his famous lines is, life is nasty, brutish, and short. There's another adjective in there. I forget. But so yeah, all of which I think is hilarious because he lived to his 90s, had a pension, and played tennis. So for him, life wasn't nasty, wasn't brutish, wasn't short. You know, he had all the benefits. I think he even had dental insurance. That was a joke. Okay, so what's the deal? In the state of nature, this is a hypothetical. In the state of nature, Hobbes says life is nasty, brutish, short. It's everybody against everyone else. And so typically the biggest brutish individuals, the Achilles, the Hercules, basically rule. They beat everybody up. They take what they want. And but Hobbes points out that even the big brutes like that need to sleep every once in a while. And so they're in danger while they're asleep, because anybody could kill them. So they make an agreement with those that are on their side, and that I'll protect you while you're sleeping, and you protect me while I'm sleeping. And then Hobbes points out, as soon as you fall asleep, they kill you. So that doesn't work very well. So what you need is a stronger, executive, and the executive is the one who's officially allowed to execute those who break the laws, and you have a contract then that limits who can execute who else, right? So the executive is already part of the contract, right? But when you have a gang and another gang, what you have is gang warfare. So that's still violent and it's still dangerous, and it's not a very safe way to live. So what happens is these gangs merge, and you end up getting larger and larger communities until eventually you have an entire state. So Hobbes is thinking in terms of England. He's not thinking in terms of, say, the Euro Federation or any larger thing than that, but the state. And the state eventually forms a social contract where the people put their faith in an executive that is basically elected by the people in order to be the one who enforces the laws. And I give up rights to that executive in order for this to work, right? I can't keep my rights. So if the executive says, okay, I want you to go and fight against the French, I don't have the right to say, whoa, wait a minute. My right to self-life, or self-defense says I shouldn't go and put myself in harm's way, so I don't want to do it. Well, because I've given up my right to the executive who has to protect the whole community, I've lost that ability to take myself out of harm's way. I have to go where I'm told, in this kind of a contract, right? The executive enforces the laws. But now, how does the executive get there? Hobbes was the tutor to King Charles II. Notice today we actually have King Charles III. Who'd have thought it, right? But there he is, right? So King Charles I, by the way,